Yesterday the beach was alive. Laughter echoed off the waves, children raced along the shore, and music spilled from radios buried in the sand. The sun burned the sky orange as people lingered late into the evening, reluctant to let go of the day. It had been busy, buzzing, crowded, the kind of place you almost wanted to escape from despite its beauty. I remembered the chaos, the sensation of being swallowed by the mass of bodies pressing in from all sides. But today it was dead. When I arrived, something was wrong. I didn't notice it at first. I was too distracted by the rhythmic slap of my sneakers against the wooden planks of the boardwalk and the comforting hiss of the ocean. But as I stepped onto the sand, that strange stillness sank into my skin. There wasn't a soul in sight. Not one. Yesterday I had trouble finding a place to spread my towel. Today it felt like I could claim the entire beach. No umbrellas flapping in the wind, no seagulls swooping low to snatch forgotten scraps. The same place that had pulsed with life just 24 hours ago now felt abandoned, almost forgotten. The sand, once packed down by hundreds of footprints, was smooth, untouched. A flawless canvas. And that wasn't all. The beach, the entire place looked different. It wasn't just empty. It was wrong. The more I looked around, the more unsettling it became. My eyes drifted to the old lifeguard tower. Yesterday, it had been freshly painted, bright white, a beacon of safety. Today, the wood looked gray, splintered, as if no one had touched it in years. I walked toward it, the sensation of sand crunching under my feet sounding strangely muted, like the beach itself was holding its breath. The closer I got, the worse it became. The once smooth railings were chipped and dark stains streaked across the surface. Rust, I told myself. Just rust. But I didn't believe it. I looked back at the shoreline. The tide was retreating, pulling away with a sluggishness that made my stomach knot. The water, which had gleamed so invitingly under the sun yesterday, now looked dull, the color of bruises. Faint shapes swirled beneath the surface, barely visible, like something was lurking just beyond reach. The horizon was blurred, the line between sea and sky indistinguishable, as if the world itself was fading. I scanned the sand again, desperate to see something, someone, anything. But there was nothing. No forgotten towels or beach toys, no remnants of yesterday's crowd. Just the eerily pristine stretch of sand and a silence so deep it made my ears ring. As I stood there, a cold shiver crawled up my spine despite the warm sun overhead. The air felt heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. I wasn't alone. I couldn't be. Something was watching. I turned back toward the lifeguard tower, squinting against the sun. Had that shadow been there before? I took a step closer, heart pounding in my chest. The tower loomed above me, casting a dark, stretched silhouette across the sand. But as I stared, the shadow shifted. It didn't match the tower's form, didn't align with the wooden frame. My breath caught in my throat. It moved again, slinking closer like it was stretching out toward me, reaching. My skin prickled with dread. My pulse hammered in my ears. Slowly, I took a step back, then another, unable to tear my eyes from the dark, shifting thing that seemed to be pulling itself free of the tower's base. The wind picked up, sending a chill racing down my neck, and for the first time I noticed the smell. Salt and decay. It was faint, but growing stronger, sharp and sickly, like something was rotting beneath the sand. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away to breathe. But the moment my eyes left the shadow, I heard it. A whisper. Low, barely audible, but unmistakable. It came from everywhere at once, threading through the stillness like a breeze you couldn't quite feel. The words were unclear, distorted by the wind, but I knew they weren't meant for anyone else. They were for me. I backed away further, my feet sinking into the cold, damp sand. The waves continued to retreat, dragging the sea further and further out, leaving behind vast stretches of exposed beach, wet and glistening under the sun. But the ocean felt like a stranger now, distant and unwelcoming, like it was hiding something. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed from the lifeguard tower. I whipped my head around just in time to see the wood split, as if some invisible force had struck it. The shadow beneath it pulsed, expanding outward, black as ink, seeping toward the sand. My stomach twisted into a knot. I turned and ran. But as I fled down the beach, the sand dragging at my feet, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The boardwalk, it wasn't there. The path I had come down was gone. I don't know why I turned back. Maybe it was curiosity or some desperate instinct to prove to myself that everything was still normal, that the beach wasn't as wrong as it felt. Maybe I thought if I just kept walking I'd find someone, anyone who could explain why it felt like the world had shifted. But there was no one. I trudged along the shoreline, my footsteps crunching in the strange, quiet sand. The wind had picked up, blowing salt against my face, but it wasn't refreshing. It was cold, unnaturally cold. I pulled my hoodie tighter, shivering as I glanced out at the ocean. The water seemed to stretch farther and farther away, retreating like it was scared, like it didn't want to be here any more than I did. And then I saw it. It started as a ripple, just a small break in the surface of the water far out, barely noticeable. But it grew. Fast. The sea was boiling, churning, as if something enormous was moving beneath it. I stopped dead in my tracks, eyes locked on the horizon, watching the ocean writhe and twist. And then they came. At first, it was just a blur, something dark moving toward the shore at an unnatural speed. It wasn't until the first one hit the beach that I realized what I was seeing. Fish. Hundreds of them. Small, silver bodies glinting in the dull light, their scales flashing as they flung themselves out of the water. They crashed onto the sand, writhing and thrashing, desperately trying to escape something, but there was no water left to save them. Their gills flared, gasping for breath as they flopped helplessly, their tails beating against the ground with sharp, erratic smacks. I took a step back, heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was happening? More fish followed, dozens then hundreds. The shore became a graveyard of twitching, dying bodies, a carpet of scales and fins glistening in the unnatural light. My stomach lurched as the smell hit me, thick, salty but tinged with something sour, something rotten. And then the sharks came. The first one crashed through the surf with terrifying force. It was massive, easily 10 feet long, its gray body slick with seawater. It thrashed wildly as it hit the sand, its jaws snapping open and shut in a panic, rows of sharp teeth gleaming. I stumbled back, eyes wide as more followed. Smaller sharks, their sleek bodies cutting through the retreating water, desperate to escape whatever was lurking beneath the surface. They hurled themselves onto the beach, their tails whipping furiously as they convulsed, their black eyes wide with terror. I couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering so hard in my chest I thought it might explode. I kept backing away, my legs shaking as I watched more and more creatures fling themselves from the ocean. It wasn't just fish. It wasn't just sharks. Dolphins too. I saw one first, a flash of gray in the waves, then another and another. They were hurling themselves out of the water, squealing in panic as they landed hard on the sand, their smooth bodies writhing in agony. I had never seen a dolphin up close before, and now, watching them struggle, watching them suffocate in the open air, I felt a deep, gnawing terror that made my skin crawl. These creatures didn't belong here. They weren't meant to die like this. But they were. One after another they came, dolphins, sharks, fish, all of them scrambling to escape the ocean, as if the water had turned into something unbearable, something they couldn't survive in anymore. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs were locked in place, frozen with horror as the shore filled with their bodies. And then I heard it. A deep, resonating rumble. It vibrated through the air, low and distant, but unmistakable. I glanced out at the ocean, my throat dry with fear. Something enormous was out there. Something I couldn't see yet, but I could feel it. The water was pulling back even more now, retreating as if the sea itself was being sucked into a black hole, and whatever was left behind was nothing but death. I swallowed hard, my eyes scanning the horizon, and then my breath caught in my throat. A dark shape. It was barely visible at first, just a smudge on the far edge of the water. But it was moving, slowly, steadily, growing larger and larger as it approached the shore. It was massive, far bigger than anything I had ever seen in the ocean before, and the sight of it filled me with a bone-deep terror that I couldn't shake. My hands trembled as I took a step back, unable to tear my eyes away from the water. The waves broke again, and this time, something even worse washed up. A whale. Not just any whale. It was a blue whale, easily the size of a bus, its enormous body heaving as it hit the sand with a sickening thud. The ground shook beneath my feet. Its mouth opened and closed, desperate for air, but there was nothing for it here. No ocean to return to, no water to save it. Just the cold, empty beach. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could only watch as the largest creature on Earth died before my eyes. And yet, it wasn't alone. More followed. Another whale, then another. Their bodies hit the sand with deafening thuds, their tails slapping uselessly against the ground. It was as if the entire ocean was trying to empty itself onto the beach, as if every living thing beneath the surface was fleeing in terror from something far worse. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. I could only stand there, frozen, as the shore became a graveyard of creatures that should never have been here. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the sounds of their gasps, their desperate flailing, filled the silence with a sickening chorus of panic. Then, in the distance, I saw it again. That shadow. That thing in the water. It was closer now. So much closer. And the waves, they weren't just retreating anymore. They were running. The air had thickened with the sharp, pungent stench of salt and death. The sky, once an unbroken stretch of pale blue, now began to darken. Low, bruised clouds rolled in from the horizon, casting long shadows across the beach. It was as though the sky itself was suffocating, collapsing under some unseen weight. I could still hear the sounds, the awful, desperate gasps of whales, dolphins, sharks, and fish flailing against the sand. Their bodies piled up in grotesque heaps along the shore, slick and glistening under the failing light. The scene felt more like a nightmare than anything real. I kept backing away, eyes darting from one dying creature to the next, my breath coming in ragged bursts. But there was something else, something worse. A change in the air. It was subtle at first, a gentle tug at the corners of my senses. But then the shift became more pronounced. I turned back toward the ocean just in time to see the water, the vast, endless stretch of blue, begin to pull away. At first it seemed slow, almost calm, as if the tide were just lazily retreating. But the longer I stared, the faster it receded. It wasn't right. It wasn't natural. The water pulled further and further from the shore, exposing the wet, muddy sand beneath. I could see shells and seaweed littering the ground, things that had no business being visible. The sea, which had been suffocatingly close just moments ago, was now retreating at an impossible speed. My heart pounded in my chest, a sickening rhythm that echoed in my ears. I turned, scanning the shore, but there was no one. The beach was completely deserted, save for the dying creatures that littered the sand. The water continued to pull back, faster now. Farther. Something was very, very wrong. I looked up. The sky had turned a deep, bruised purple, clouds swirling overhead in thick, angry masses. The wind picked up, howling in my ears and whipping at my clothes. I could feel the temperature drop rapidly, the air suddenly cold, like the breath of some massive, invisible creature. And then I saw it. Far out, where the sea had retreated, a dark shadow loomed. It was barely visible at first, a smudge on the horizon, but it grew fast, rising higher and higher like a black wall of death. My eyes widened, heart seizing in my chest as I realized what I was seeing. A wave. Not just any wave, this was something monstrous. It towered above the ocean, rising higher than I could comprehend. The top of it curled like the claws of some massive beast ready to strike. It was so far out, and yet I could already feel the weight of it, the sheer force that was building beneath the surface. It was a tsunami. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to run. No. I turned and bolted down the beach, legs pumping, sand flying up behind me. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to get as far away as possible. But as I ran, the sand beneath my feet seemed to thicken, slowing me down. It clung to my shoes like wet cement, dragging at my legs, making every step a fight. I could hear the low rumble of the ocean behind me, a sound so deep it vibrated through my bones. I dared to glance back. The wave had grown impossibly large, an all-consuming wall of water that stretched from one end of the horizon to the other. It moved with a terrifying, deliberate speed, devouring everything in its path. It was bigger than anything I'd ever seen, bigger than the tallest skyscrapers, bigger than mountains. It was the end of everything. I ran harder, my legs burning, lungs screaming for air. But the sand, it was pulling me down deeper with every step. It was as if the beach itself was alive, trying to trap me, to hold me in place. I staggered, nearly falling, as the wind howled around me, carrying with it the faint, twisted cries of the sea creatures still dying behind me. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I could feel the waves approach, feel the crushing weight of it bearing down on me, even though it was still so far away. My legs felt like lead. I pushed forward, desperation clawing at me, but the sand gripped tighter, pulling me down like quicksand. I tried to scream, but the wind snatched the sound from my lips. The roar of the wave grew louder, deafening, a sound like the earth itself was splitting apart. The clouds above churned violently, the sky turning black as night. I stumbled again, my feet sinking deeper into the treacherous sand. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. My vision blurred, the edges of the world closing in as the massive wall of water loomed closer, casting everything in its shadow. I glanced up one last time just as the wave crested above me. The sheer size of it was impossible to comprehend, an entire ocean suspended in the air, ready to collapse. The water glistened with a sick, unnatural sheen, and within it I saw shapes, dark, twisted things moving just beneath the surface, too deep to make out clearly but unmistakably alive. They were coming with the wave. I tried to pull my legs free, but the sand had me now. It was up to my knees, pulling me down, refusing to let me escape. I thrashed, heart racing, but it was useless. My breath came in short, frantic gasps as the wave's shadow fell over me, swallowing everything in its path. The sound of the ocean was everywhere now, a deafening roar that drowned out everything else. My world was reduced to the sound of crashing water and the feel of cold, wet sand pulling me under. I could see nothing but the towering wall of water above me, impossibly high, impossibly fast. I squeezed my eyes shut as the wave crashed down, the force of it hitting with the weight of 1,000 worlds. The impact ripped the air from my lungs, the cold water enveloping me instantly, dragging me down into the depths. I was weightless, spinning, tumbling in the violent current, tossed around like a rag doll. My mouth filled with salt water, my lungs burning as I fought to breathe, but there was no air. Only darkness. Cold, endless darkness. I tried to scream, but the water swallowed my voice. Then silence. No one ever found me.